Livability started life as the Shaftesbury Society, so 100 and many years old, set up by Victorian Christians, like so many were. Today, we mainly provide residential care homes, support for disabled people in their own homes. We've also got a school and a college for young people with multiple and profound needs. But my role specifically is working to try to take some of the learning that we've gleaned from living with and working with, making life together with disabled people, and sharing that with churches. We really believe in community, and so spending time with churches, thinking about how they can better reflect their community and how they can become communities where people are included and welcome and truly belong.
Thank you. And thinking about the underlying theology, has that developed? You talked about the Victorian Christians who established you. Is work being done around that whole area of theology?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly the same. We're working. We wrestle with our theology constantly. I think theology sounds like a dry-ish word, but actually it is the language of change in most of our churches. We have to talk theology to get things done. You can't say necessarily the Equalities Act says this, can you do it? You have to say, well, Jesus says do this, and then people do it. But we're activists, and activists are pragmatic. We don't have a very pure theological model. We try and figure out what works. But one thing I'm quite influenced by the liberation theology, and it's grappling with issues of power, which I think when it comes to disability is often the elephant in the room. We don't like to talk about power, particularly in church. And I think becoming a community that is truly inclusive will mean that power dynamics have to shift and change. And so when I talk to churches, I do talk about power, and I don't apologize for that. So that's interesting. And I guess the other part of my approach, or our approach, is just a belief that the come and see approach, which I can talk all day about disability, but nothing equals the power of seeing what a participative, inclusive community feels like, what it looks like. What does it feel like to be worshipping with people with all kinds of abilities and disabilities? Because once you've got a taste of that, then that's addictive and that's exciting.
So what are the challenges in this?
Well, I think those of us who work in disability probably have a similar story. It's still seen as niche. No matter how many disabled people there are, no matter how much you tell people that, most people's lives end in disability. Disability is the journey that we're on. We're all temporarily able-bodied. It's still seen as niche. And so when I want to talk to a church about disability, they say, well, we had a talk on gender last year, so we're kind of full. And well, we've got a talk on race coming up next month, so we don't really need something on disability. It's just seen as one of many niches, and that's heartbreaking, because I believe that not only does disability make the issue makes demands on church, but it also offers so much to church. It's a gift. Every church community were to realize the gifts of disabled people in their midst, those churches would thrive more. And so, that's the challenge.
Thank you for that. So what are you actually going to throw out now to us?
Yeah, well, the big question, how do we get churches to practice what they preach? Like I was saying earlier, every church believes that they have an amazing welcome. But that when you look around inside a church, that's just not true. That they're not welcoming to everybody equally. And everybody in church, in theory, believes we're all equal. In theory, believe God's made us all. in theory believes that we're all made in God's image, but when you look at the practices, you can see that that's not really believed in your heart. And so the big question is, how do we make that jump? How do we make that conversion?